Hey guys, so in today's video we'll be taking a look at function scopes and what basically a scope is and how we go about using it. So if you haven't watched the previous video, which is getting to know what a function is and how to use a function, I would highly recommend you do that. If you have, then this is the video for you. So let's begin. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you two examples that are related to function scopes. The first one being using immutable data types. So I'm going to just copy and paste something I've already written. Now we know that immutable means you cannot change it, right? So a variable that has a number like we have over here, a string or a letter, once these have been instantiated, which means assigned into a variable in memory, technically you cannot actually change the value of it. So it's fixed. Now when we write functions, we come across this problem where if we feed a value into a function, we do something to that value, we expect that value to be changed outside of the function. This is known as a scope. So let's take a closer look. Firstly, I've initialized a value of 32. So in this variable 32 is in it, and I've got a print statement. So I've got three print statements. One is over here. The other one is inside this defined function, which I've called change value, and the final print statement is outside. So the reason I put 1, 2, and 3 is just to show you the order of how and what is actually happening. So another new thing is this ID function. What the ID function does is if we give it a value, say this variable over here, it will show a number which corresponds to a specific memory location in the computer. So let us go ahead and run it and see what actually happens. Great. So these are the print statements I'm talking about. So we've got 1, 2, and 3. And for each print statement, I've also printed out the variable val. And we have the ID for where the value is stored in memory. Now I've defined this change value function, which takes in a argument. It can be anything. In this case, it's just a number, just to illustrate the purpose of immutability. Now we take whatever we put in here and we basically say that, all right, I want it to be 35. So whatever's in here, make it 35, and we print it. When we print it, we print the memory location of this variable. The reason behind doing this is we can keep track of whether the item is the same or not. Now, as you can see here, the first print statement is printed. That's all well and good. So 32, and you've got this massive number over here. And now we run into this function. So we've given this value over here, and we have fed it into this function. So now this bit over here has 32. Now we're saying that 32 should equal 35, and that we can see over here, which is cool. That makes sense. And we print that, so we've got the memory location of that. But now, when we come over here, we see that it's actually 32. And we have the same memory location as this first one over here. Now, what's actually going on? Shouldn't it actually be 35? The reason that this isn't actually 35 is because every function, when you create it, has its own space. So right here, this bit over here is all under this function. And this is the scope. So for this variable over here, the scope is inside the function. And for this value, or for this variable, the scope is outside of the function. So you've got everything inside the function and everything outside of the function. So it's two, you can think of it as two different spaces in your code. The first space being everything outside of the function, and the second being everything inside of the function. Which is why when we actually do 32 and we have this print statement over here, it actually shows 32 because this variable is referring to this variable, this one over here, and it has this memory location, as we can see over here. And this all changes when we give this variable into this function. Now this value of 32 actually gets copied in here, so it's somewhere in memory in this bit over here, and so it belongs inside the function scope, which is why when we do a print statement we get a 35 because that's the scope. And when we print it out over here, we still get 32 because this all is outside. This variable belongs to this and this. This one belongs just to this one inside over here. That is to do with immutability. So keep that in mind. Now let's take a look at immutability. So I'm going to copy paste what I've done over here and run it. If you can actually have a look and see, we've got a list, initial list over here. We have the ID and the list values. So that's at that memory location. Then we give the list and a number to change into this function. So what we do is we basically get the list, assign it to a new variable called number list, and then we put 4 to the end of the list. And when we print it, we get this bit over here. And then what happens when we run it outside of the function scope, we get the same thing, which means we have altered a mutable data type inside the function scope. And it has actually changed it when we run it outside. We know that these two are the same list because of this number right here. This corresponds to where this list is stored in memory. And so if this was 3, even though that this could be the same, we know that this is not the same list we're talking about as these ones over here. So that's something to keep in mind when you're dealing with data types, any kind of data inside a function. It's the function scope. Are you dealing with an immutable or mutable data type? If so, how is this going to affect my program? Will I actually change this number or change this string if I give it in to a function? If I give it a list or a tuple, what will happen? That's what a function scope is. So whatever happens inside a function stays inside a function unless it's a global variable, but that is an entirely different video of itself. But if it's not inside the scope, what happens when it's outside of the scope and where it belongs? That was just a really quick video. And now in the next video, we will actually take a look at how we can use functions in a practical application.